Hello and welcome back to the Shutter Sports Refresh. This is the weekly spot for all of the most important news in sports. I'm your host, Finn Noel, and let's get right into it this week, starting off with some baseball news. Now, as always, the MLB season is a long one with 162 games and lots of twists and turns along the way. Let's go division by division in the league and see how each team has fared, including the top trades at the deadline. We'll start things off with the Toronto Blue Jays, who are starting to cool down after being the hottest team in baseball the last few weeks. They are atop the AL East division. Now, the Blue Jays have passed the title of hottest team to the Boston Red Sox, who have won 8 of their last 10 games and have now leapfrogged the New York Yankees for second in the AL East division. The Yankees have now moved down to third in the division after being in the World Series last year. Now, to fix that slip in the standings, they've tried to fix their season on the fly with a few trades. And the last two teams in the division are the Tampa Bay Rays and Baltimore Orioles, and although they're not in the playoff mix, they have some young players on their team, so it's looking bright in their future. Moving on to the AL Central, it is the Detroit Tigers sitting on top, and they look to be the only real championship contender in their division. And I say that because all of the other teams in the division, including the Cleveland Guardians, Kansas City Royals, Minnesota Twins, and Chicago White Sox, are all selling their players. The most notable player to be sold was former Cy Young winner Shane Bieber to the Toronto Blue Jays. Moving on now to the AL West division. The Houston Astros and the Seattle Mariners are both fighting for the top spot in this division. And to try and snag that top spot before the regular season ends, they both made some moves at the deadline. The Mariners acquired Eugenio Sanchez from the Arizona Diamondbacks, and the Astros brought back aging star Carlos Correa from the Twins. Correa is returning to the Astros after a few years away from the team. The Texas Rangers and the Los Angeles Angels both stood pat at the deadline, while the Athletics traded away Mason Miller, who's one of the best pitchers in the league. Moving into the National League now, we'll start things off in the NL East, where the Philadelphia Phillies and the New York Mets are duking things out. The Mets, just like their crosstown rivals the Yankees, added some pitching help, while the Phillies plucked up Minnesota twin Johan Duran. The disappointing Atlanta Braves and Washington Nationals surprisingly chose not to sell this year, while being more than 15 games outside of a playoff spot. And the Miami Marlins are on a recent run, winning 8 of their last 10 games, and didn't really want to mix things up at the trade deadline as they push for a playoff spot. Moving over now to the NL Central, we see the Milwaukee Brewers atop. This is their first time being atop the division all season, and they didn't do much big at the trade deadline. Meanwhile, the Chicago Cubs, who used to have the top spot in the division, added Willie Castro from the Minnesota Twins at the deadline to try to regain that number 1 spot. And then the Cincinnati Reds and the Pittsburgh Pirates traded with each other. Ke'Bryan Hayes ended up going to the Reds in exchange for some young prospects. And then the classic team, Louisville Cardinals, sat on their hands over the deadline with their even record. And for our last division in baseball, we'll move over to the NL West. The reigning champions, LA Dodgers, didn't move much at the deadline. The San Diego Padres are sitting in second in the division though, and they made a big move. We talked about the Athletics trading Mason Miller earlier, and this is where he ended up, in San Diego. And then the San Francisco Giants didn't do anything, and the Arizona Diamondbacks and Colorado Rockies sold what they could. As we've talked about all year, the Colorado Rockies are still very bad. Now, that was a ton of baseball news, so I think it's time to move into the next sport. Let's talk about F1. The Hungarian Grand Prix went down yesterday, and McLaren finished 1 and 2 in this one with a dominant performance. McLaren has had easily the top 2 drivers in F1 this year, with Lando Norris, who finished first in this one, and Oscar Piastri, who finished second. If you look at the driver standings now, those two are number 1 and 2 in the standings, with Piastri just 9 points ahead of Norris now. Now, looking back at the race results, in third place was George Russell out of Mercedes. Russell is closing in on third place in those driver standings, but is still behind Max Verstappen of Red Bull. And if we look at the constructor standings for this year, surprise, surprise, McLaren is in first, followed by Ferrari and Mercedes, with Red Bull in a close fourth. There are only 10 races left in the season, so we look forward to this final stretch. In some fun news in tennis, the National Bank Open is going down in Canada. We've reached the quarterfinals in this tournament, and a lot of the big names aren't participating, so it's not too high on everyone's radars, but there are still some cool upsets. For example, on the women's side, the highest seed left in the quarterfinals is just the 6th seed Madison Keys. On the men's side, though, the number 1 in the tournament, Alexander Zverev, is still in it. The finals for this tournament goes down on August 7th, so we'll see you next week for those results. And for our last piece of news this week, let's take a look at some golf. There is a huge tournament coming up this weekend, the end of the golf season. This is the FedEx St. Jude Championships. Now, the FedEx St. Jude Championship is part of the FedEx Cup, which is a 3-stage tournament. The top 70 players will play in the St. Jude Championship, and then that will be cut down to 50 for the BMW Championship and 30 for the final Tour Championship. And the champion of the entire tournament will win a whopping $10 million. And these tournaments will be going on all throughout August, so make sure to keep tuning back into the Refresh to see your updates. And that is it for this week's episode of the Shutter Sports Refresh. I've been your host, Finn Noel, and I hope you enjoyed watching today. You can check me, Shutter Sports Media, and our writer, Lucky Roberts, on Instagram here. Thanks for watching.